In the last summer of the old century, 28 men walked into the green ribs of the Appalachians and did not come back out. Their names were written in the Ashburton church ledger: loggers, surveyors, a Pinkerton man traveling under an alias, and then, in a different ink, struck clean through. What the sheriff's posse found in September of 1899, beneath a clapboard house on Holloway Ridge, was not a grave and not a mine. It was a room the mountain had not given, a room somebody had carved and kept. Folks up there still won't say cellar. They call it what the sisters called it, the keeping room. Before we go down those steps, do one thing for me. If you're listening right now in a dark room or on a long drive, hit subscribe and ring that bell. Stories like this, buried by money, by shame, and by the silent strong families can buy, deserve daylight. Drop a comment with where you're tuning in from, and if your town has a name folks won't put on a map. Now, Ashburton, West Virginia, 1899. A two-story box of a house at the end of a wagon road that curves like a question mark through black spruce. Paint the color of skim milk. Curtains sewn from feed sacks. Two women in the window, Eleanor and June Holloway, daughters of a midwife who died catching a baby during a thunderstorm and a father who left nothing but debts and a cabinet of anatomy prints. The Holloway sisters took in boarders for a living. Men on their way to cut, to hammer, to string wire. One or two at a time at first. Later, in threes. The sisters were quiet the way wells are quiet. June kept books that were too neat, a ledger that ran like a river, names, dates, the workmen said they were headed to, the day they'd be out from underfoot. Eleanor kept what she called a register of good stock, but she didn't mean cattle. Pages of family names braided to other names, mountain lines crossing mountain lines, arrows, circles, little marks in the margins that looked like tally scratches and weren't. No kisses in those pages. No tenderness. Just math. A kind of math that counts people the way farmers count seed. If you think you know where this is going, slow down. There are parts we won't show. There are words we won't give the air. This is not a story about the leered. It's about control and terror, and a room where choices were taken off the table and locked in a drawer. Ask anyone old enough to remember the flood of 1907 about Holloway Ridge and watch their mouth change shape. They'll tell you about the deer that wouldn't cross the yard. They'll tell you about salt poured in a circle around the back steps. They'll tell you about the night the church bell rang 6 times though the rope was cut. And if they trust you, they'll tell you about Sheriff Amos Pike, who kept a second ledger under his floorboards, the one he was not permitted to file, the one stamped in a crisp county hand, sealed BY order, January 1901. It begins, not with a scream, but with a song. A Fox-Fi Blue Evening. June on the porch snapping beans, singing a child's rhyme under her breath, something about corn silk and good sons. Eleanor inside at the long pine table, copying names from last winter's almanac, families with Hardy Boys, families with no boys, families with blight. When men passed the house, the sisters did not wave. They nodded once, like schoolteachers taking attendance. Later, in town, those men would be remembered for the wrong thing, what they carried. A stranger with a doctor's bag, a logger with a spool of thick wire, a coalman with a pocket full of blasting caps. But ask the women who did the washing. Each of them had a spare shirt that wasn't his, folded and carried like a promise. The keeping room did not always exist. That is important. Houses grow extra places when something in them wants crowding. At first, it was only a pit under the floor where apples and potatoes slept through winter. Then a second shelf cut into shale. Then a door you had to bend your head to find. Then steps. Then bars. Not prison bars. Not at first. Crib slats thick as wrists, seasoned with lye so a hand could not get a purchase. Ropes braided from hair. Yes, people said that later, whispering. Hair. But the sheriff's ledger lists twine, hog ring pliers, buckles, canvas straps. We'll stay with the list. If you look down there by lamplight, you would have seen order and something like science. a wall painted with lines and little chalk dates, a row of hooks with tag numbers stamped neat as library tickets, a shelf of jars filled with vinegar and roots, and a Bible with certain pages thumbed thin, the ones about begetting, the ones about fruitfulness, the ones about women who took upon themselves. The sisters had rules. That's why so many people still won't call them monsters. Monsters don't keep rules, but tyrants do. And Eleanor and June had a tyrant's gift. They could look at a man and see a number instead of a name. On August 12th, the girls at McKendree Creek Schoolhouse counted 27 men's hats hanging on the pegs during noon meeting. On August 13th, there were only 24. The Holloways served strawberry jam on biscuits that morning, and June laughed once at something no one said. By the end of the month, the ridge had gone quiet in a way that makes dogs lie down and show their bellies to the air. It's easy, now, to say a thing like this could have been stopped. That any decent man would have cut those bars and carried those stairs up into the sunlight. But decent men were busy in 1899, fighting a coal war, catching coughs that turned into funerals, paying doctors' bills with shotgun shells, going blind by 30. And the Holloways were not witches. They paid their taxes, sang in the alto section, brought stew when babies were born and when people died. Their sin wore a church dress and looked you in the eye. What broke the ridge silence wasn't a body. It was a boot. Amos Pike found it under a wild grape tangle. A man's left boot, hobnails bright as fish scales, the leather scored by wire. Down in the keeping room, the floor was swept. The air smelled like carbolic and ash. A piece of chalk lay snapped in two. On the wall, beneath the lines and the dates and the tidy hash marks, was a simple word written very small, left-handed: help. If you're still with me, this is where we put our backs to the door and light the second lamp. We are going to read the pages Pike wasn't allowed to file. We are going to open the sisters' register and translate the marks no one was meant to understand. And we are going to follow the last man, number 28, down the ridge and into the room the mountain did not give. Sheriff Amos Pike never wrote adjectives in his field book. He wrote dates, weights, measures. Boot, left, hobnails, 10. Grapevine, west of ridge, 30 paces from fence. Wire scarring present. He copied the word help from the cellar wall into the margins and underlined it once, the only flourish in 100 pages. He brought 2 men he trusted and 1 he did not. Deputy Lyle carried the lamp. Preacher Pritchard came because no one could stop him. Finch Tarl, the man Pike did not trust, came because he had a cousin by marriage to the Holloways and was the sort of cousin who finds reasons to be useful. They went at dusk when the house keeps its breath shallow. June met them on the porch with that ledger-smooth smile, palms open, apron flowery. Eleanor stood behind her with a dish towel folded with military precision. No need for a warrant, Sheriff, June said, and stepped aside as if welcoming summer air. The kitchen smelled of lye and something sweeter underneath. Too sweet. The way flowers smell when they've been arranged to disguise a room where someone recently bled. Pike walked the floor once with his eyes and twice with his boots. Old houses talk. This one lied. The boards gave an extra whisper near the stove, weight and hollowness in the same breath. He knelt. Eleanor set down her dish towel, and in the silence you could hear the clock's minute hand shoo. June said, "Sheriff, that door sticks," as if a little problem were about to embarrass them all. Pike found the ring, iron rubbed smooth by hands that had no business touching it, and pulled. The door rose. Cold rushed up like a kept promise. They saw the chalk first, the delicate prison of numbers around the edge of the room. Dates, heights, hash marks grouped in careful fives. Then the hooks with nickel tags. The row of jars, vinegar, tansy, foxglove, bellwort. Preacher Pritchard whispered a psalm and forgot the words halfway through. Lyle lifted the lamp and the keeping room breathed back. A wall charted like a survey, a shelf of clean folded canvas straps, a notebook on a nail with the spine broken, and beside the stairs, a pair of pliers that did not belong in any kitchen. "Root cellar," June said lightly. as if the right word could restore the house to decency. "We keep good order is all." "Order," Pike said, and set his hand on the little notebook. On the cover, "Register of Good Stock." In Eleanor's hand, the margins were alive with signs, arrows, circles, letters that weren't letters at all. The sheriff did not read ciphers, but he recognized intent when it stared back. He did not arrest them that night. Holloway Ridge had rules of its own, and one was, never turn the key until you know where it fits. Pike closed the hatch. The house exhaled. June folded her hands again, and Eleanor's eyes flickered, just once, to the empty peg where an iron tag, 28, ought to have hung. The first page of the register was not a list of men. It was a family tree turned cruel, a lattice of mountain names wound like briars around each other. McCoy, Wetzel, Gaines, Pritchard, Rains. Lines joined lines, some arrows pointing away, others pointing back, and every so often a mark in the margin. A hollow square, Eleanor's symbol for blight, a darkened circle, strong, a triangle, wanders, and, chillingly, a star, takes to duty. Pinned behind the first page, a handbill from a lecture at the courthouse in 1889, The New Science of Heredity, by Dr. Abram Kelton of Cincinnati, promising improvements to race and vigor through proper pairings. In the back, a letter never mailed. Esteemed Dr. Kelton, Eleanor had written in her schoolgirl hand, "My sister and I have made observations of our own, and we find your conclusions borne out by humble experiment. Our ridge suffers want of issue, and we undertake to remedy what feebleness and sickness have interbred." June's notes were colder. W. Petrie, Roper, 5 feet 9 inches, right hand, eyes dark, lungs sound, father died 60, mother alive at 58, joined 7/3, compliant. Harlan Biggs, Sawmill, 6 feet 1 inch, eyes blue, rash elbows, reads slowly, mean when drunk, refused 6/28, returned 7/2, compliant after fasting. Not a hint of where joined meant. Not a whisper of who decided compliance. Pike flipped further and found a page that wasn't the sister's hand at all. A clean, confident script in a different ink. The name signed at the bottom, L. Brand, Pinkerton. The man from the ledgers in town, the stranger too polite by half, had been here before Pike. His note was spare, professional, pattern, disappearances cluster after deliveries to Holloway Place, milk, salt, canvas, every 4th Monday. Timing coincides with him numbers posted at McKendree, 319, then 521. Possible code. House maintains a lower room with restraints concealed as farm gear. Subjects are catalogued. Sisters use language of stock. In the margin, 3 words underlined twice, 28. Left boot. Pike could feel the case trying to close its fist around him. He could feel the mountain take a second breath. People think horror lives and screams. The keeping room said otherwise. Its terror was arithmetic. 14 tags hung in a row like medals. 10 hooks bare. For tags stacked neatly on a shelf with grease pencil numbers rewritten as if a more permanent hand had wanted them that way. On the back wall, chalk lines mark heights in inches, neat notches every quarter, and a postage stamp calendar 8 months deep with little dots on certain days that matched the hymn board in Pike's memory. Sundays the Ridge had sung "There is a fountain filled with blood, and come ye sinners, poor and needy." The sisters had used the numbers to talk to each other in a room full of witnesses. There was rope, yes, but not the rough farm kind, braided, softened, handled until it remembered wrists. There were buckles polished by use, pegs worn smooth by the same hands over and over. And there were the jars, roots and tinctures Pike could name and a few he could not. Tal leaned in too close and Eleanor said, sharp as a knife nick, "Those are for cramps and fevers, Mr. Tal," and the way she said fevers made the room colder. On a shelf, a music box sat wound but silent. Pike turned the key as if to wake a sleeping bird. The tune creaked out, "My bonnie lies over the ocean," and Deputy Lyle muttered that he'd heard it once at the schoolhouse picnic the day the Holloways donated a basket of pears. And beneath all that order, the scuff marks. The low scrapes a boot heel makes when it refuses to go where it's led. The black crescent where a hobnail had bitten the stair and tried to hold. Near the chalked word, help, a little smear of something dark rubbed away with lye until the grain of the plank raised. No bodies. No chains left locked. No key on a hook. It was a room for doing things and for erasing the fact they had been done. Pike closed the notebook. The house listened. In the yard, something moved soft through the spruce, and every hair on Deputy Lyle's arm rose like wheat in a wind. "We are leaving," Pike said, and did not explain to the preacher why. Number 28 had two names. The one he carried to the ridge was Luther Brand, insurance man. The one he had earned over a decade of polite trespasses and dirty train rides was Leonard Brand, operative. He had a crooked incisor and a way of smiling that made people want to tell him something useful so they could feel the smart of being useful. He walked with a little limp he could put on and take off, depending on whether he needed pity or underestimation. He came because Pinkerton accounts began to fill with mountain handwriting, wives with no bodies and no wages, and a fear that didn't fit any particular man's fist. He came with a doctor's bag, tweezer, needle, chloroform, string, a hymnal with certain numbers circled, 319, 521, and a heel of a boot that twisted off with a pressed coin to reveal a hollow where paper could hide. He checked into the Holloway's spare front room, remarked on the pears, complimented June's jam, asked Eleanor for a bucket of well water and a towel. He wrote, in a hand finer than any ridge man's, boarding houses suspected. Kitchen night traffic. Double shadows at backstep. Singing under breath. Beneath floor, mechanism concealed. Men pass on road and do not pass again. He tucked the note into his boot and set the boot by the bed like any tired traveler. He did not sleep. At 1:10 a.m., the music box played one thin measure by itself, as if the air had finally grown heavy enough to push it. At 1:15, the floor breathed. He rolled off the mattress and lay against the boards to listen. He heard June's voice and Eleanor's, single syllables, efficient, like Miller's counting. He smelled lye, vinegar, pears gone slightly to wine. When the floor moved again, he stood up, slid into his trousers, and reached for the boot. It wasn't there. Only its twin sat neat by the bedpost, a mirror without a man. Down the hall, a polite knock. "Mr. Brand, we take water at night for the sourdough. Would you mind?" The voice that asked sounded like cake in church. He opened the door because he was brave and because bravery and the job felt like the same coin when you were very good or very foolish. June held the lamp. Eleanor stood just behind, the dish towel folded and refolded. "Thank you," Eleanor said, and looked down, past his eyes, to the place on the floor where his boot should be. He followed her gaze, and in the half-breath it took for his face to understand, he realized he had become a number. They could have gone with a shout. They did not. The Holloways respected quiet the way surgeons respect cleanliness. The house made a door where there was no door, and Brand stepped into it because stepping forward felt less like surrender than any other direction. The steps were shallow, gentle enough to coax a tired man down, and the lamp light went ahead of him like a commandment. What the sisters said later in their statements, and what Pike recorded without adjectives, was that Mr. Brand assisted. Not forced, not dragged. Assisted. They made sure Deputy Lyle wrote it that way too. Assisted folds a man into his fate even while you're the one holding the crease. In town, the women counted quiets. Sally Petrie kept track, the gaps in porch talk, the places where laughter stuttered, the empty seat in McKendry's tenor row. She brought a pie to Holloway porch and left with nothing but a single spoonful and the sense she had fed something wrong. On the fourth Monday, hymn numbers read 428. Preacher Pritchard chose "Here is Love," vast as the ocean, and afterward he stood in the empty hall and stared at the board as if the chalk itself were hiding a sentence. Pike asked the judge for warrants and got them. then got them rescinded by a letter the judge later swore he hadn't written. The letter was too clean, UN Mountain as a city glove, and used words like reputational harm and ladies of standing. The Holloways paid taxes in sterling and heirloom quilts. They baptized on time. They had buried their mother proper. Money and manners do not make sin smaller, Pike wrote in a private line he never read aloud. But they make it quieter. Finch Tal brought gossip wearing a hat like a fact. The sisters had cousins on the county board, cousins in the telegraph office, cousins who kept keys for doors Pike didn't even know Ashburton had. "You'll want to move careful," Tal said with his useful smile. "Ladies don't forget." On the ridge that week, the bell rang 6 times with the rope cut. In the night air between each strike, people heard something thin, like a music box finally spending the last of its winding. Mothers pulled quilts to their chins and recited their children's names, each one like a flame you cup with your hands. If this story had mercy, it would give you a single villain, a single wound, and let you stitch it. Holloway Ridge is not merciful. It will show you a photograph. 2 girls on a stoop, bare feet, braids. Eleanor already neat at the edges. June looking up as if someone taller had said her name. Behind them, on a kitchen chair, their mother, Ruth, hands like a road map of every birth she ever caught with twine and boiled water. On the table, a folded broadsheet about healthy mothers, and a cabinet open to display anatomy prints stolen from a doctor who moved downhill and never returned to claim them. Ruth died catching a baby when thunder rolled the valley like a bad dream. Folks say she smiled at the end and told the wind to hush. After, Eleanor lined the anatomy prints in a straight row and memorized them the way other girls memorized hymns. Bones that looked like fences. Pelvises like gates. She learned the names for things: ilium, sacrum, pubis. Names are spells, but some spells should not be said by people with hurt hearts. June learned numbers. She counted the way a blackjack dealer counts, without ever seeming to move. She counted who lived past 50 on each branch of each family's tree. She counted who could carry a sack of meal 2 miles without stopping. She counted coughs when the coal smoke pulled thick in January. She counted babies with clubfoot and babies that didn't cry. She counted the way Ruth had taught them, gentle, attentive, except the gentleness slid off somewhere and only the attention remained. Eleanor wrote to Dr. Kelton and never posted the letter. She wrote to a cousin in Ohio and did. The cousin sent a pamphlet full of certainty, all of it wrong dressed up as right. "You can fix a ridge," the pamphlet promised in a man's smooth hand. "You can select, as farmers select. You can, if you never look anyone in the face." What the sisters made in the ground began as an idea above ground. That order could solve sorrow. That the ache of growing up poor and motherless could be erased by careful notes and stricter rules. They were not witches. They were worse. They had a plan. The second visit was not a visit. Pike came with 6 men and a coil of thin chain for doors. The Warren had terms soft as butter, inspection of home, the kind of words that let Law step in the parlor and stop dead on the rug. "We'll be down," Pike said, and June said, "We'll be here when you come back up." She said it without malice, as if it were a courtesy to give a man the future tense. The hatch fought them. Not stuck, barbed. Someone had fitted the latch with a moving tooth, a small clever bit that had to be pressed and lifted at once. Pike found it because his fingers knew what men do to mechanisms when they mean to exclude, and because he had opened traps before in other houses where it did not pay to keep your boots clean. The room was emptier. Hooks bare. The calendar rubbed half away. Chalk washed down the wall like bad rain. But emptiness tells. On the stairs, 2 grooves had deepened in the grain, the slick trace of 100 descents. On the far wall behind the shelving, a plank sat a fraction proud of its post, a door that did not want company. They pried it. Behind, a passage, hand-cut, close, breathing damp. The men looked at each other and thought of mines, and of fires in mines, and of the way a tunnel eats light. Pike went first because he had asked them to come and because leaders go first when the going is narrow. 10 paces. 20. The air cooled, then warmed, then cooled again as if the passage were threaded through different kinds of earth. The lamp licked water off the rock. And then, timber. Someone had cribbed a cavity with care, shored it like a small room, and left a bench with 3 items that had no right to share a surface: a hymnal, a strip of nickel tags, and a boot heel, empty where paper had been. Lyle lifted the hymnal. The ribbon was set between Rock of Ages and Just As I Am. Beside the page numbers, pencil figures: 319, 521, 428, 228. 28, Lyle said softly, and looked at the boot heel. Pike looked at the tags. 25 through 27 lay strung like fish on a wire. The last loop was bare. Where? Finch Tal asked, voice too quick. If not here, then where? Further, Pike said, and the word sounded like an injury. Further turned out to be older. The passage shouldered into a seam of stone someone else had opened long before the Holloways were born. A crawl ran under the ridge, a fox's road, the wall slick where water had kissed them winter after winter. Pike recognized prospecting marks, idle pics from boys who'd gone looking for coal in a time when rumor ran ahead of rock. The tunnel delivered them to a low chamber that had not quite decided to be a room. The Holloways had persuaded it. Bits of plank made a platform. A chain ran through a ring in the rock and back out toward the house. It had been cut clean recently, the bitter taste of file still on the metal. On the platform, a basin. In the basin, lie water. Beside the basin, 3 small folded papers sealed with wax, squares, precise. On each, a number pressed in nickel: 21, 24, 26. Preacher Pritchard made a sound, then that was mostly air. Pike opened the first square with his thumbnail and read 7 words in a hand that wasn't Mountain. Eleanor, you are wrong. I remember her. He opened the second. June, take me back or take me. The third was a single line of him. Nothing in my hand I bring. The men looked for bodies. They found none. They found a scuff of coal on the wall at shoulder height, where a man had turned and caught himself. They found a thin length of hemp wedged between stones, cut ragged. They found chalk dust in places chalk shouldn't go unless a hand had been shaking. They followed the passage another 30 feet and came up into light. Not the Holloway kitchen, not the yard. A mouth opened in the ravine where water braided the hill in spring. Someone had covered it with woven spruce and moss. From the creek, you'd never see it. From the house, you could watch it all day. Finch Tal's useful smile flickered. They go out the back, he said. Sometimes, Pike answered. Or they're taken out the back. He did not add what the Mountain made plain, that some of the taken had been turned into numbers that matched June's ledger exactly, and some had become something no ledger can hold or excuse, a missing man who still knows all his names. You can plan your way into a trap and plan your way out if you have enough time. Leonard Brand had lubricated time as best he could. He had hidden notes in other boots, not his, by paying boys 2 bits to carry messages to towns he wasn't going to. He had circled hymns not because he prayed, but because he needed the sisters to tell him when they meant to move. He had tethered his name to 3 women with long memories and longer patience: Sally Petrie, who counted quiets; Ada Gaines, who washed for the Holloways and knew the weight of a rope when it changed; and Betty Raines, who kept the church keys and the hymn board chalk under her bed. Brand's last note never made it to Pike, but his second to last did, and it was the one that mattered, the one Pike found, not in a boot, but in McKendry's hymnal, folded tight and slid beneath the psalms. Pike, it read, and the steady script dipped only once on the sheriff's name. I am where you think. Evidence will be gone when you come. They keep nothing they cannot justify to themselves. Your lever is not in their house. It is in the town. The sisters have friends. Take the Bible they use to bless what they do. Open to begetting. You will find numbers. The board is code. If I do not return, tell Sally I was brave and tell Ada to check the wash kettle for ribbons. Pike did what the letter told him. He opened the Holloway's Bible to Genesis, and there, neat in the margin next to begat after begat, tiny pencil ticks counted forward. In Ruth, a name had been underlined twice, Naomi, and written beside it with a hard hand, "We make our own kin." June's arithmetic was a gospel to her in a way the gospel never could be. He sent Lyle to Sally's. She had already checked the kettle. She handed over 3 ribbons dyed a hard red with pokeberry. 3, 1, 9 sewn small into the tails. "She thought I'd never see," Sally said, and did not mean June. Pike looked at the town with new eyes then, at who brought quilts when and who watched too closely when money changed hands. At Finch Tarl, useful Finch, whose cousin ran the telegraph and who always showed up with information after the Holloways had already cleaned. Fire ate the Holloway house on a Tuesday with no thunder and no explanation. Inside fires leave a different ash if they are impatient. This one had patience like a grandmother's. It began under the floor in a corner where lye had been spilled too many times, climbed the walls as if someone had marked the path for it, and laid the roof flat with the quiet satisfaction of someone folding a completed shirt. Eleanor did not run. She stood in the yard with her palms open, as calm as the day she'd welcomed Pike in, and watched the house convert to smoke. June wept once, a single sound like a jar cracked by cold. The sisters did not touch each other. Pike arrived with buckets and men, but the ridge had decided what to keep and what to give back. The keeping room hissed. The passage breathed heat. The woven spruce at the ravine mouth blackened and curled and finally lifted as ash. When it was done, the cellar was an open mouth, and the only thing left intact in that whole heaved-up ruin was a piece of the wall where the chalk had been. The word help had burned into the grain, a ghost brand no lie could wash. The county took Eleanor on moral charges, a phrase that lets a town be righteous without being specific. June was not taken. She was not found. Some say she went into the ravine and out through the mountain the way the men had been taken. Some say Finch Tarl drove her in a buckboard at midnight as the ridge held its breath and the stars looked away. Some say the churchwomen hid her. Others say they wouldn't have, not for love nor money. The truth is a hard stone inside other stones. Eleanor's trial was sealed. The judge who hadn't written his own letter did not write his own verdict either. Ashburton was too small to hold what she had done. They sent her to the big brick place in Weston where the halls are long and names can be misplaced on purpose. She took nothing in but her hands, which she folded and refolded, and the habit of counting. The nurse who bathed her said Eleanor watched the steam rise from the tin and nodded each time as if ticking days. The ridge grew a story where the house had been the way a stump grows a ring of saplings. Children were told not to play in the ash because the mountain remembered boots and might mistake little feet. Men who had lost loved ones came in hard weather and left little offerings: copper pennies, a spoon, a hobnail knocked from a heel and polished with thumbwork until it shone. In 1907, when rain turned the creek to a knife, the ravine's mouth changed shape. The flood tore 3 things out of their hiding and set them at the bend like unwanted gifts. A strip of nickel tags, 22, 23, 27, a rusted buckle, and a scrap of paper sealed in wax against a decent death. On it, a name, Brand. On the back, in a tidy, hurried hand, 28. I am not erased. Sally Petrie married a man who made her laugh and never minded when she counted. Ada Gaines washed for 3 less households and lived longer than anyone expected because some people do when they have seen too much to be frightened by small things. Betty Raines locked the church at night and hid the hymn board chalk in a tobacco tin under her bed for the rest of her life. Pike kept his field book under the floorboard until the day he went quiet on his porch between one breath and the next. It passed to Lyle, who added no adjectives and underlined help twice. Finch Tarl moved to a town with a train schedule printed in a larger font, where usefulness fetched a better price. He did not write home. People said the ridge got better, that babies came louder and men kept more of their names. But you could still feel order trying to creep back and call itself science in a clean address. There were meetings at the courthouse about fitness and improvement. Men with pamphlets spoke about stock and never said love. Preacher Pritchard learned to shut the hymn board drawer softly and put his hand on the wood a second too long, as if to hold the number still. On August afternoons, just when the flies start to go stupid in the heat, you could hear, if you dared stand where the kitchen once was, a brittle little tune. Not always a hymn. Sometimes just the ghost music a spring makes underground when it's forced through a narrow place it doesn't like. There is a kind of ending that ties ribbon boughs. This isn't that. The Holloway house is a rectangle of grass that grows too fast even in drought, and the creek has a bend that keeps its secrets in slow curves. 28 men walked into the green ribs of the Appalachians. Not all of them came back in ways a ledger can record. Some names were carved into church benches. Some were said only at night in rooms with quilts pulled high. A few, stubborn as hobnails, turned up when no math expected them, in a camp 2 ridges over, hired under a different name with a scar on the ankle from a cleverly placed wire, on a train west, eyes fixed on a line of horizon that would not bend, in a letter from Kentucky, poor spelling, and a pressed leaf, unsigned. As for Eleanor, the nurse at Weston said she paused at Genesis, at Ruth, and at the family trees with their biblical begats, and nodded as though the world itself had been written in columns for her to amend. Once, when Thunder recited the long roll call of the far hills, she said, almost kindly, "We were making kin." The nurse, who owned a dog and no children and had learned what mercy weighs, answered plainly, "You were taking names." Eleanor blinked as if that were a word she had not counted. June's absence did what absence always does here. It made a road of rumor. Some say she drowned and the creek keeps her as a straight thing in a crooked course. Some say she married under a different hymn and counted a different town into order. Some say she learned what the men learned in the keeping room when the chalk snapped, that a plan is just fear dressed up, and fear can teach you to open your own door and step through. And you stand at the edge of a yard that isn't a yard anymore and listen for a sound I can't promise. The ridge will give what it chooses. Maybe a scrap of music. Maybe the small steam of a word burned into it so deep the grain itself learned how to say it. Maybe just the quiet arithmetic of trees. What do you think Ashburton sealed in its ledgers? And what did it leave out on purpose? Do you believe 28's last line, "I am not erased"? And if so, where would you look first? Tell me in the comments what your town won't put on a map, what name your people won't say after dark. If this haunted walk through the keeping room held you, make sure you're subscribed and the bell is on so these buried histories can keep rising. Share this with someone who swears the past is tidy. I'm signing off for now. This is Tales Never Told. I'll see you in the next one, where we pry up another floorboard and listen to what the quiet tried to hide.